Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from Jenny Hval called Blood Bitch. It's often considered one of the great contradictions of American popular culture that for as much as it worships at the altar of violence in the military-industrial complex, and Canada's not that far removed, I'm not kidding myself here, everyone tends to get kind of skittish around sexuality. You can have plenty of gore in your movies and still walk away with the PG-13, but you show the exposed breast and you can expect the R, to say nothing if you want to show a penis or a vagina. Kind of amusing how parts of the entertainment industry gives everyone a free pass to deliver plenty of penis extensions that deliver death, and yet get kind of antsy when confronted with the real thing. Now, music's a little bit different, most because you're not dealing with the image outside of the album art, but let's be honest, it's not that different. Let's get real. With a rare exception, the majority of modern music is a lot more comfortable talking about male sexuality than female sexuality, and even then it's often masked as innuendos or played as a tease. To actively dig into the fleshy, messy side of sexuality, peel back the sensuality and bravado to get something more primal but no less real, that's explored far less, especially on the female side. And that's no surprise either. For as much as some artists threw open the doors to openly embrace sexuality in their music, it's often paired with a desire to make it sound accessible to a mainstream audience who isn't quite as comfortable, entice rather than get into the explicit details. And then there's Jenny Hval, a Norwegian singer-songwriter and experimental musician. While much of her music has been characterized by droning, oddly structured soundscapes full of weird experimental shifts, to say nothing of an odd pop sensibility that keeps creeping through, what's always caught my ear with her stuff is the lyrics. And the best way to describe them is something akin to the inverted metaphor of the film Short Bus, usage of plainly sexual acts and language in order to say something more, rather than the other way around and saying or doing something to imply sex. Of course, her themes in abstract writing have gone further than sex, but at the end of the day, her music approaches the flesh-driven reality of sexuality with a sort of unrestrained frankness and language that for certain can startle and shock even the most sexually comfortable and well-adjusted person. As such, her music for me has always required a concerted effort to fully contextualize and understand. One of the reasons that, yes, this review is as late as it is. But I gotta say, I was really looking forward to digging into Blood Bitch, blending elements of 70s exploitation films, time-traveling and gender-bending vampire iconography, and a cute focus on menstrual blood, seriously, into an experimental pop framework partially inspired by the drones of Norwegian black metal and produced by noise musician Lasse Marag. This is gonna be something, the sort of trip that I expected to be really challenging, but hopefully hugely rewarding. So, was I right? Well, okay, in a way I was, but like always, Jenny Hval threw a real curveball with Blood Bitch that I was not expecting. Granted, given the inspirations I described, I'm not sure what I was even expecting, whether or not I could even describe it, but not this. It's not that it's even an impenetrable release either. Once you put the time into reading through the lyrics and give it some serious thought, the themes materialize pretty quickly. And yet, while I don't think any other tone or presentation would work for this sort of subject matter, especially the way she's presenting it, it's also not exactly a sound I like all that much. Certainly not as much as I want to. And I've got the strange feeling that Jenny Hval could have pushed these themes much deeper or much darker than she ultimately did. But before I get to that, we need to talk about how these themes and influences work, and friendly warning, even if you're familiar with Jenny Hval, this will get pretty weird pretty quickly. First of all, any elements of exploitation are primarily used to inform the aesthetic, not so much the content. Percussion and dance beats that feel imported from forgotten B-list goth rock soundtracks, with swell driven from muted organ lines and synths that feel chill and alien, distinctly cheaper than the material that got popular in the musical subgenre. It feeds into the very seedy vibe that often informed a lot of those exploitation films, and with the commitment to atmospheric depth and abrupt transitions, it certainly reminds me way too much of the artsier side of that genre. And even if you're not familiar with exploitation, you've probably seen at least a taste of this on the indie film circuit. The auteur-driven projects that nearly always went too long and used splashes of gore and graphic sex to smuggle in complex, usually overwritten and pretentious ideas. A little ironic, because I'd easily make the argument this is Jenny Hval's most concise and and least graphic project in a while. Hell, it's not even as abrasive as I was expecting. Sure, on Female Vampire you get some smoldering guitar seething in the background, and The Plague certainly has its moments of demented, distorted howling in the cut-up abstract that the song is, but really, this record can feel surprisingly tame, especially in a lot of its execution. And this definitely comes through in the second major thematic element of this project, vampires. And Jenny Hval made a few major departures in her interpretation of these creations. First, by a renewed focus on the eternity that they must face, and more importantly, by raising questions of vampire morality. Now, let me assure all you, this is far removed from Twilight comparisons. These vampiric figures, they do hunt humans, and they don't shy away from the bloody, sexualized nature of these conquests. And that's because the key word of the day here is desire. Vampires, a blood bitch, they're the sort that have lived for centuries, maintaining their youth, having survived the ages by maintaining firm control of their desire to the point where time has just blurred into a continuum of fits and spurts of ravenous hunger. Not so much time travel, but a life extended beyond most human comprehension. And yet, this record isn't shy about painting another parallel, because midway through this album, on The Great Undressing, the album breaks the fourth wall and shows Jenny Hval talking with her friends in real time, describing this vampire theme, and then the friends are laughing at how basic it seems to be. Usage of the word basic, it's important beyond the modern colloquialism surrounding it. Jenny Hval is focusing at the primal desire that lies at the root of her art, which, like the cyclical nature of vampiric bloodlust, also manifests as an uneven stream of spurts, with her brand of art often dreamed as grotesque, paralleling the moments of succumbing to bloodlust and feeding. And thus, it almost seems apt that the feminine menstrual cycle and sexuality becomes another undercurrent and another layer to Hval's artistic pursuits, perceived as very graphic and shocking to so many, too many. But instead, it's something natural and of the flesh on this album, driven by the same uncontrollable flows of desire. There will be pain brought forth either through menstruation, vampiric feeding, or the creation of art, but Jenny Hval also highlights the majority of said pain is felt by her and her alone. Only in the case of the vampires, any actual harm wrought unto others, and maybe even perceived in the art, but not really. And yeah, it's a well-constructed idea. I love how even among her friends in that fourth wall-breaking scene, the discussion drives a wedge between her and those who are not quite as uninhibited as she is. But this is also where things start to get a little bit tricky and the metaphor starts to break down. Because for as much as Jenny Hval strains against the strictures of morality and good taste that would censor her art or censor her conversations, analogous to the same aversion of menstrual blood, and the fact that sterile sanitization is framed as very cold and bleak, it's very telling how it's framed on this album. Vampires do in fact feed and prey on others. That's part of their mythos. And intermingling that element into the blended metaphor doesn't entirely hold together across all three lines. The art that Hval might unleash, free of archaic elements of good taste, can be disconcerting or hard to grasp, I'll admit that. Look at the fragmented and careening nightmare of the plague. But despite moral abjections, vampires still feed on other people. And that brings up a question of tone. I get removing the moral stigma surrounding sexuality and menstruation, and even art, but when Jenny Hval brings in that vampiric element, instead of bringing the lurid elements more to the forefront to heighten the intensity of the music and enforce a tougher moral question, she instead seems to hold it all at arm's length. Hell, on Conceptual Romance, she mentions this sort of abstraction that she's constructed, using it to blur the lines more to ensure a sound thematic parallel all the way. And yeah, I kinda get why that's done, muddying the waters enough to push away stigmas towards art and the female cycle, but not only does it undercut any attempted moral complexity built into that parallel when it comes to how art impacts people or how vampires impact people, but it also removes the impetus to make the songs hit with a lot more impact, be a little bit more hard-hitting and aggressive. Oh, don't get me wrong, this is probably the closest that Jenny Hval's ever come to pop song structures with verses and an actual hook, and I definitely dig the dark wave and goth rock inspired synths and atmosphere, from the more aggressive grooves of Female Vampire and The Great Undressing to the deeper swells and echoing darkness behind Conceptual Romance and Period Piece. But if you were looking for an excuse for more visceral production or delivery to back up these pop song structures, that doesn't really materialize here, which can leave some of these songs feeling a little bit unsupported or underproduced. And that's not counting some production choices that just didn't really work for me. Feel a little bit underwritten too. In the Red features the sort of panting interlude that could very easily represent running or aggressive sex, and I think it comes a tad early on the formation of this album, especially when two songs songs later to get Untamed Region, we get the sounds of a pencil scratching that continues until the sample monologue from Adam Curtis. And yes, while I've already talked about how intentionally jarring the Plague is, I honestly don't mind it that much. What caught me more off guard was how compressed and thin that fizzy beat was on Secret Touch. An otherwise pretty damn great song, but that beat didn't really mesh for me. But to circle back here, one thing I noticed about this album is that undercurrent of increased confusion and uncertainty, from Curtis's monologue about contradicting news narratives to the lyrics on Lorna, which raises questions about how one is ever taught to deal with that desire and craving, be it from a newborn vampire hunting for fresh blood, an artist seeking to refine their craft in that cycle, or a woman seeking to understand her sexuality. In modern popular culture, there's no easy answer for all three. And Jenny Hval does a striking job in highlighting the cost of that confusion, and yet there's a certain irony that thematically this record itself doesn't resolve. Now don't get me wrong, you can tell through the writing that these themes and parallels were very carefully considered. I respect the ambition here, but there's a part of me that thinks this could have been a much more striking project if it actually became more transgressive like other Jenny Hval projects, or kept the thematic parallels a lot more streamlined. Now how one would actually do that? Harder hitting songs, sharper writing through the lulls, even a few more songs, given that this record does feel a little bit short for the complexity of the ideas on display. It could have been fleshed out a little bit more. Well, that's up for debate. But as it is, look, it's not really resonating with me more deeply, and trust me, I wanted to. There's a lot to unpack here. As such, I'm giving Blood Bitch by Jenny Hval a very strong 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, but as I've said, I've liked her earlier projects a fair bit more, from the religious iconography running through Apocalypse Girl to the more starkly sexual and provocative elements of Innocence is Kinky or Viscera. I definitely get why a lot of people like this and why this album has so much critical acclaim, and I do appreciate what it's trying to do, but as it is, I'm just not sure it's for me. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I got the poll up here. I honestly have no idea where anybody's gonna fall on this album. I know a lot of people really like it, but I don't think a lot of people could really explain it either. And as I said, guys, I really want to like this album, so I guess it just doesn't always click. That happens. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get more invested in my schedule and you guys want to be able to request more albums, the link over there is to my Patreon, where 3 times a week you guys get a chance to vote on schedules. Not really so much right now because we're coming into year-end list. But beyond that, in the Saturdays, if the people in the higher Patreon levels, you guys get to request albums and get them on my schedule. You want more details? The link's right there. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.